Should we let the participants sing?
Yeah, let's go.
Okay, we're going to start this meeting. Thank you, everyone, for coming back again today to yet another exciting session that we have lined up. Thank you once again to all the patrons at F.Stop for registering in such large numbers. As all of you know, today's session is hosted by F.Stop, which was started in 2008 by three photographers, Devang, Moody, Ashit Parikh, and myself. It was formed with the objective of inspiring young talent through interactions with eminent photographers, cinematographers, and filmmakers. I would like Devang if he could share a short film about F-Stop.
Sure, Viren.
Thank you, Devang. I also want to acknowledge the presence of all our panelists that are here today. Thank you so much for being such an integral part of F-Stop every day and making the talks more inspiring and engaging always. Today, I'd like to invite a very eminent speaker who's with us. We welcome you, Priya. We have Priya Sheth as a speaker with us as F-Stop. Thank you, Priya, for to accept our invitation today as a speaker. I'll just read out a small introduction that we gathered about Priya to before we take things ahead. Priya Sheth is a celebrated cinematographer with almost 2 decades of experience in Indian films. After studying a short course in filmmaking at New York University, Priya returned to Mumbai and started out as a camera assistant with notable cinematographers in the Hindi film industry. She assisted in films like Deepa Mehta's Earth and Jane Campaign's Holy Smoke. In 2003, she helmed her first feature as director of photography, the most acclaimed indie Bara Ana. And more than a decade later, she did a first big budget film, Airlift, for which she received much critical acclaim. She was the DOP on the 2017 feature Chef. Priya has also shot thousands of commercials and is the leading underwater cinematographer in India for Hindi movies and commercials. She is currently working on a historic series for the web. Priya also helps run Elora Studios, a highly successful 4.5-acre multi-set studio where many TV shows and films and ads are shot. Thank you once again for Priya for coming to F-Stop and accepting our invitation. I also welcome Anis Adanwala, who's a CMAS and PADI instructor. He is also a partner at Oka Dive Club and Underwater Films Services. Thank you, Anis. Thank you once again to both of you for joining in today. I'll not take much more of your time. I'll hand over the session to Priya to take it ahead from here. Thank you.
All right. Hi, everyone. Can I see other human beings? It's really hard to just talk to myself. I do that anyway for the last 35 days. It's nice to see other people. Can you put on the split screen?
You'll have to select the grid view.
Okay, got it. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me on this. As I was just saying a little earlier before we began, that it's nice to see nice to see my colleagues and see people from the professional part of our lives because in the last, I think, 30, 35 days, the only thing that I've become really good at is jhadu, katka, price of detergent, onions, how to cook, and it's a much needed reprieve back into the world of photography and cinematography. So thanks for having me. And Anis is my colleague, and the reason I think he just said he's from Orca Dive Club, but as you all know, apart from being a cinematographer who shoots on land, I do a lot of underwater cinematography as well for films and basically for films. So it's not underwater cinematography as in the National Geographic or documentary stuff, but it's all the animals of Bollywood. So this is a whole other breed of underwater cinematography. Anis is my colleague. We work together very, very closely. And he's an underwater instructor, safety supervisor. He basically handles all the tech side of the shoot. I do the cinematography. He basically makes sure that we can do this job. So that's Anis. And we're going to get into underwater cinematography a little later into the chat. We'll just start with a basic introduction about myself. I started cinematography about 20 years ago as an assistant. I came back from NYU as I said. And when I was coming back actually to India, my professor at NYU said that, he said, I know this is politically incorrect to say, and please forgive me for saying this, but I think someone needs to tell you this while you're heading back to India, that women don't do this. There are very, very few women cinematographers even in America, and I don't know what the numbers are like, but I would assume that there are close to none. And I'm not saying don't do this, but you must be aware what you're getting into. And thankfully, just being as thick-skinned and with so much bravado, I think when you're young, you really don't give a shit about what anyone says. And I came back and I, dived right into the world of cinematography. I was very fortunate, actually. I started working with this DP called Gopal Shah, who was doing a lot of advertising work at that point. And he was great, actually. And I think a large part of my experience, and I know that this question obviously does come up all the time as a woman in the industry, and what does it feel like as a woman cinematographer? I think a large part of my experience was defined by the person, my first exposure to, a cinematographer. And my first exposure was Gopal, and he was, work is one part, but I think it's such a sensitive thing at that point when there are no other women doing what you do, that the person that you're with and how he treated me and how the respect he had, I think, for the fact that I was a woman. There were not many. He never made me feel uncomfortable at all. In fact, to the contrary, he pushed me very, very hard, but not also, that patronizing pushing of, you're a girl, so you can do this. So I think a large part of my initial experience was defined by the fact that I started working with Gopal. And when I look back, I realize how important that was, because when you're looking for a mentor when you're young, and it is that person that's going to define whether you actually stick around in the industry or not. And I've become very aware of that and mindful of that. And the role of, when you grow older and more senior, the role of being that mentor. So I think it was very, very important and quite defining my journey at that point. It took me a very long time to get my first feature film break. And I think, again, in hindsight, I think hindsight is always 20/20. When you're going through it, and I think you're younger and you're not, I realized only when I became independent that there might be an issue with being a woman in the industry. Because till then, when you're assisting someone, you're riding on someone else's shoulders. They're getting work, you kind of get work. And if he was popular, which he was, we were shooting 30 days a month. So you assume that that's the way it's going to be. And for any person who's going independent after that, male or female, there's always, the work just drops from being an assistant to becoming independent. So in the beginning, of course, there's a lot of insecurity about, am I good enough? Just generally, am I going to get work? And then it goes on and on. And I think after about 5 or 6 years of that, one starts having this faint recognition that gender had something to do with it. Because there were people who were, a bunch of us were assistants at the same time. We became independent at the same time. Our careers took a very, very different trajectory, completely. Like, there was no question that they were getting more opportunities than I would get. And I think, to answer a question that you sent me earlier, if I had been to FTII, would my journey have been any different? It's not so much about, I think, what you learn at FTII or in any film school. I'm not taking away from what it is, but a large part of that is you come out with a network. And I think that's it's a very, very valuable thing when you step out into the world to have people, if you have directors who you'd studied with or other people, and then you work with each other because you're the same level, and actually everyone grows together. So I think that is what I probably missed not going to film school, to answer that question of yours. And let me just look up at what you had asked, because it's, yeah. So I think, okay, let me continue with that. So I think, I did this film called Barahana, which was my first independent film with a director who I'd done a lot of commercials with, Raja Menon, who one knows now. At that point, we were all starting out, small indie filmmakers. We worked together because we only worked together. So the entire team actually was just people who had been doing a bunch of work. Sorry, excuse me. And unfortunately, what happened with Barahana is that 2 days after it released, there was a producer's strike. So the film just never made it into the theaters. So we barely showed it, and then that tanked. So it was like, okay, now we'll start from scratch. And then it took another 10 years, I think, till Airlift happened. And that's the reason, I guess, you asked me for this thing. Airlift was a seminal turning point for me. And I don't think I realized why it would be so important. But apart from the fact that it was a big budget Bollywood film, what I was not mindful of, but I do recognize now that when we talk about stereotyping people and stereotyping certain jobs and gender-wise, for a woman to have shot an action film of that kind and that caliber was really quite unique. And I didn't realize it at that point, and I didn't recognize it. You're so caught up in just what you're doing. But now in hindsight, I realize, I guess that was, it was quite a breakthrough thing. And I'm quite proud that it was well shot, and it was correctly and appropriately shot for what the film was. So talking about Airlift, actually, because that was, that has actually been something that has been responsible to change my career, actually, to a large part. And I was thinking about what I would like to speak about today and what in particular I'd like to bring up. And I was thinking that, action, when we're talking about action, and that was an action film and how the action was shot. And there's been so much talk about, is the action differently captured because it was shot by a woman? Or is it just, and I get asked this question all the time, and I'm sure it's going to come up many times because that makes it unique at one level. So I don't think it's, I think who you are as a human being does influence what you shoot. It doesn't matter male or female. Who I am as a human being is different because I'm a female, and I think when I bring that upon something, that would have its unique voice. So it's very hard to answer whether gender would play a specific role. But since I was going to bring up Airlift, I had these clips that I wanted to bring up and talk about action. And we had, there are many action sequences in the film, and we'll go through a few of them because I think it's interesting that the way action is shot in Airlift, and this is something Raja and I had kind of very specifically thought about, that the action is not going to be gratuitous, it's not going to be exaggerated, and we're not going to do this very slow motion, things flying. Because to me, that's not how we see when something happens and unravels in front of us. I think what actually happens is it happens in a blink of an eye. And it's the aftermath of that action is what actually sticks with you. And because this was a much more of a human story, we took that approach to action. It was like the action will happen in real time, and it will be told from the eyes of where you're supposed to be watching it. It is going to be very subjective. So they're not going to be suddenly one intercut of one low angle, tire screeching, or one sudden drone shot just because it'll look good. But very, very subjective as to whose eyes you're seeing that action from. And the eyes could be somebody in the film, or you could be a third person. But we made a very concerted effort. So even each action set piece was choreographed, and then we shot it quite often in a single take. Or even if it was cut, sometimes it was cut just for pacing and for rhythm. But the idea was that you saw it from where you were meant to see it. And this is quite tricky at times because you design these, big streets with big action, and you cover it in this very limiting fashion. So I would like to, Vinay, if we can pull up the first action piece from Airlift.
Sure.
So I'll let you guys watch this and then we can come back and discuss. Okay, we'll come back to this later if we can. So, this sequence, when we started out actually thinking about it, and, basically this is the character Ranjit Katyal. He's going home and he's not sure whether his wife and kid are there. He's been told that they're probably missing. There's a certain unveiled threat that's been made to him. And when we were setting this up, we shot this film in Ras Al Khaimah, which is another emirate in the UAE. It's highly underdeveloped in terms of, there's no big tall buildings and there's none of the glassy facades. It looked a lot like Kuwait in 1990, which is the reason we picked this place, because the shell of the city, it's not even a city really, but the shell of the small town actually looked a lot like what Kuwait probably did in 1990. So we set up this, we were there for our recce and we did many, many technical scouts and recce's. This is a tough film to actually put together. So while we were there and we were like, we'll set up the whole street, the cars will be burning, all this is going to happen, and then we'll cover it. And we'll shoot him, we'll shoot the car, we'll shoot close-ups of him, we'll shoot all this action in bits and pieces, and then, it would be cut together. Remember Raja and I, at night we were discussing this. It was the night before the shoot, and we had this conversation, and we're like, this is not sitting well because this is untrue to what the narrative is trying to say. We're talking about this man who's trapped at this moment. He's in his car, that's his only safe space. He's going through this war-torn street, and you never know what's going to happen because, well, it's warland. And, to suddenly be outside and cover it with a drone and shoot all these, just be exposed and shoot it. Both of us just came to each other, this is not working. So how can we actually make this, how do we make this work? And we decided, which was actually quite risky at that point. We said, you know what, we're not going to go outside the car. We will put the car in the passenger seat. And I was like, I don't want to be handheld because that's not the feel either, So we, overnight actually, with the Jimmy Jig operator, figured out his remote head. We put the camera there and we decided, and the next morning we had to tell Akshay. So he came up and he goes, okay, so tell me. And we're like, you know what? We're not shooting this. We're going to shoot it from inside the car. We're going to, do many rehearsals. So we sent him to his vanity and he was just lovely about it. He sat there for 4 hours while we rehearsed this mechanically because it was one shot. So till lunchtime, from 7 to 1, we rehearsed this. And from 1 to 4, we had 3 hours to do 4 takes because that's how long it would take. And we, stood by, and I think we backed what we believed in at that moment. And we shot it in that manner. And to me, I'm very proud of this because I think it completely achieves that claustrophobia, that idea of being trapped and actually seeing the street from his eyes when he's helpless. And it would be very easy to have gone there and just shot the crap out of it, because you're also safe then. You can just take 100 shots and then give it to the editor. And then, they'll put it together. And at some level, it's going to work. But to actually take that call and for the director as well, to turn around and say, you know what, no, let's just do it like this. And if we're going to tell a story in this manner, let's back ourselves and let's actually turn around and do it like this. So to me, this was, I'm very proud of this and all the other ones as well that we'll go through. This was pretty cool. We go from here, we'll replay the clip and then we'll just come back and discuss it because what we're going to do in the next 10 minutes is just watch different action clips and just see how different they are from each other and how they're just serving the story in a particular manner. To our minds, at least, what was correct for that narrative. So let's just
play the same clip again, Priya?
Yeah, not the same. Just continue. Where you paused it, just play it through.
Okay.
It changes. Okay, so this actually, where we continue the clip is actually the next shot from when he's driving in the car. And the reason I wanted to break it up is because even though it was one continuous sequence, you can see it's treated very differently. And, I think there's it pulls apart in terms of one part of the sequence we did with, as I told you, we did rehearsals for like 6-7 hours. And then we just took a couple of takes to get that moment in one shot. And then what we did for the second part of the sequence, which is when he comes home and actually discovers that his wife and child are missing. So we shot this on a set. We actually had, in Bombay, Mustafa Stationwala, our incredible production designer, had built this set. So what we shot before this was the soldiers coming into the house, which we'd already shot. They come in, they completely, they destroy everything, they break it up, and they leave. What we did in real life is then we locked the set that night. We didn't let anyone come in. Everything, the way they had dropped it, was left. It was, you call it a hot set. So we just locked the set that night. The next morning, Akshay was not allowed to come onto set. The director went to his vanity and told him, now what we've done is that, in the story, the soldiers have come, they've destroyed your house. So you are going to now walk onto this set, walk on into your house and realize that your family is missing. And we didn't rehearse it at all. I was ready, it was handheld. So you can see the complete difference from this very smooth, kind of remote operated camera, which was almost mesmerizing, and it kind of slowed time down to, again, this very frenetic handheld. So we hadn't rehearsed it at all. Akshay hadn't rehearsed it. He came running from his vanity, which was parked about 200 meters away. He came in, and when you see him break open that door, that was like camera rolled at that point. I didn't know what he was going to do. He didn't know what he was going to do. He didn't know what he was going to see. We just told him the whole house has been destroyed. You're free to do what you like. And for me, I had to just follow him and capture what he was doing. And I think what happens is if everyone's in the same moment, and if you're all, if you're in that zone together, and you actually, it was so symbiotic. It was like a dance between him and me, actually, because there was nobody else in the room because we were covering camera 360. So it was just him and me, and the focus puller who was hiding in some corner. And all we would, what he was doing, I was reacting to. He would allow me to move, I would allow him to move. And we just went and we did this in one take. And even now my hair stands on end because I think if you're in the moment, something magical will appear. And it's just to show the difference in approach between two sections of the same sequence. And how, when it's correct for the sequence, it really does, you can tell. So that's, do you have any questions about these? Because it might be nice to...
So, Priya, we had a question, I think, which is relevant to what you just said. Somebody had asked us that during Airlift, we especially during a lot of action sequences, a lot of shots seem to have been shot handheld. If you want to kind of comment on that.
Yeah, that's because of my great big Punjabi shoulders. Okay. Well, it was correct for the film. So wherever, as you've just seen in two sections of the same sequence, one is completely not handheld and the other was handheld. So whatever felt right to tell the story at that particular moment, and it sounds kind of cliched because it's a war film, you're going to shoot it handheld, but there is a frenetic energy that does bring to the table, which was correct. But the film didn't start out like that. So it's very carefully designed. When the film starts out, there's no handheld. There's a lot of dolly moves. There's a lot of tracks. It's quite static. And as it picks up is when the handheld work begins. So it's done by design. So it's not all through the film. It's when the war begins, the handheld work begins. And again, then it tapers off. So there is an arc to even the camera operation in the film. And that was done by design.
This is one more question, probably if it fits here. I read somewhere that you started shooting digital quite late. So was there a difference in treatment that you would have normally done on your film and how you probably shot? I believe Airlift was shot on digital. Yeah, so was there some kind of a shift in kind of treatment in terms of light or anything that you had to adjust a lot in terms of shifting from film to digital?
So I started on digital late, meaning later than, it's a matter of maybe, which has still been, I don't know, 10 years or 8 years or something like that. So by the time we were doing Airlift, we were well in the digital world. Although being the kind of film it was, I would have loved to have shot it on film just because of the particular time period that it belonged to. And also, till now, highlights in daylight are still, digital still doesn't quite cut it. You just don't get that kind of, the heat and the intensity and, that kind of latitude still doesn't for daylight work. So if I had my way, I would have shot all the daylight work on film and all the low light work and the night work, I would have shot on digital, because to me, that would just be a perfect blend of taking the best of both the capabilities at that point. So, and you know, this is another question that you kind of asked me earlier about does your style change when you're shooting film or you're shooting digital? I think what happened with us is we were very, very fortunate that we all got trained on on film, because the rigor and I think the discipline of shooting on film, as we all can attest to, because we all look like a certain age, is there's just it's far more than on digital. Because I think what happens with the digital, at least that's how I look at it, is that illumination is taken as lighting. The fact that the sensors are so sensitive, the fact that you can record light, meaning it's lit. But with film, you actually had to craft light. You know, whether you wanted a shadow, whether you wanted fill, you wanted to have negative fill, for every single part of it, you had to make a conscious effort. You couldn't just point a camera into a place and hope for the best. So what's happened is, I think that level of rigor, and having brought that into digital, where you can allow yourself to ease off a little, that to me has been very valuable. I'm very glad that my training was on film and now I'm getting to work on digital, because there is an ease of use with digital as well. But that rigor of training, I think, is missing when you start out on digital only, because you don't know how to sculpt light, or at least that's what I'm finding, you know, that sculpting of light to such precision. Because with film, every pinpoint of light that you wanted, you had to have to add or to remove. Like nothing happened accidentally. So that learning, I think, has been very important.
Yeah, thank you. Should we go into the next clip?
Yeah, so let's go into the next clip. So this clip, I think, is another approach to shooting action, which I find, you know, very often when you experience anything, it's not about action only, but anything that happens where in the blink of an eye, it's over. And you don't know what the hell is going on, you know? So it's just the confusion of it. It's like, what's happening? Do I look here? Do I look there? What's happening? Who's about to get shot? And before you know it, it's over. And I think, and the aftermath, which is the expression on Ranjit Katyal's face, is where you actually register what has happened. So we kept trying to play around with, you know, the temporal rhythm of narrative, where sometimes you're slowing it down, but you're not slowing it down by shooting slow motion, or you're not speeding it up, but you're doing this by either the edit or by the way you're pacing, the taking of it. So this was another way of doing it, you know, where we thought that this was important, where he was just a byproduct. He was like a bystander. He wasn't meant to get killed at that moment. So to create that confusion, where we actually did it with, we shot 2 cameras at one time, and you really don't know, because you're jumping axis, you're crossing all over the place, and then suddenly it's over. And everything happens very, very quickly. And the idea that actually action unfolds in a very, very short span of time, it's what happens after is your recognition of it and your realization of it. So that's the kind of theme we went with for the action in Airlift. So you can go to the last one, which again is very different from these.
Just give me a second. We play Nimrat, right?
Yeah. So this one is, well, it was a POV again. And we actually shot it from the balcony where she's hiding. We took that call. Again, you know, we could have gone into the middle of the action and shot the crap out of it. With 100 shots to be taken. The car's coming up and, you know, the guy comes out, he shot, the camera pans. So we could have intercut this into many, many shots and shot it in many different ways. But again, the idea of being, just to be true to, it was her point of view. And it was unfolding in that second and a half. You know, sometimes it's quite heartbreaking when you're setting up these beautiful action sequences and you take these calls of saying, no, we're not going to cut it and, you know, admire ourselves for the next 15 minutes and just get these beautiful shots and keep getting to look at them. But to just do it in those 2 shots because it felt correct for what was being told at that moment, it's actually quite hard because there's a lot of restraint at that moment. So we shot it in that 1 shot and it's over. But again, that's how it would be. And I think the immediacy of that action is quite telling, because it gives it a certain value, which I think would have been lost if we went down there and we went in the middle of the action and the camera's there, you know, shooting bits and pieces of it. So I wanted to just discuss these 4 pieces because I thought that they quite stand apart from each other. They give the same feeling at the end of it in terms of the immediacy of the action, but they're done in a very different way. So so that's it about these.
Yeah, Priya, the two more questions that I find might be relevant that have been sent to us was you had been more of a advert. You showed a lot of commercials. You said before you get into Airlift, and you still do them. So how was it like to get your first big budget film, which obviously was nothing related to being shot under the water? Like it was completely a lovely film, it required a different film, and it was your first big budget film. And also connecting question that's I find interesting is that how important is it for you to connect to the script before taking up a film? Had it been that you did not like the script of Airlift, would you have still taken it up, being the first big film that was offered to you?
Okay, so let me answer the first part of your question, which is, I think I did come from a world of advertising. I was only shooting advertising till then, which I shot that one indie film, which I told you, which no one saw. And I shot a lot of underwater to that point. And as I don't know if photographers get slotted, but we cinematographers get slotted very, very quickly. You can you can shoot fashion or hair or skin or underwater. So I am probably the most slotted person for the most number of things. I get all and I get none. Because till then I was doing a lot of cosmetic stuff, which I still do. I do a lot of hair commercials. I do skin commercials. I shoot underwater. And so when this film showed up, to answer your question, this was again Raja Menon, the one who gives me a break again and again. One of the few people who agrees to shoot with female lead, even though it was an action film. It's not that it went that easy for him as well. Like for him to even get the producers to agree to let me shoot this was a bit of a tough ask. And it's not only about the fact that I was a woman. I think I hadn't shot anything big before that. So it was a big leap of faith for everybody, including the actor on board, including the producers, including the director. But I think when you have, and I think this is very, very important, when you have a relationship with a director and you've been working together so many years, and if the director trusts, and if you fundamentally trust a cinematographer's eyes and their sensibility, and you've worked together for so many years, I don't think it matters whether it's big or small or cosmetic or action. That isn't, at the end of the day, if we're creative people and we're in a world of narrative storytelling, one probably has that skill, or one hopes one has that skill to be able to traverse many genres of work, whether it's cosmetic or action or underwater. And you need someone to believe that you can do that. I think that's most important. So I don't think the break came because suddenly they thought I was some shining spark in this industry. The break came because I had a relationship with a director who really believed that all the work that he'd done with me, for as small as it was in the past, he believed that these were the eyes he wanted telling this story. And would I have said no if I didn't like the script for Airlift? Well, absolutely not. I would have said yes no matter what. It was my big break. And I really wanted a big break at that point. By then you start questioning whether you have talent or not, because you've been working for so many years and just not being able to cut it for some reason. And I think one of the reasons I do realize now is gender. And it took someone like Raja to unequivocally stand behind me and say that he'd want me to do this. So, I would do this no matter what. I would have done it no matter what.
To add to that, Vishal Arvind, who is a part of the participants today, he's asked a question that did the director in Airlift ask you to change certain shots? Or were there points where you both disagreed to a particular shot, and how did you overcome that?
So that's interesting because we do a very, very intense prep every time we work. And we don't discuss every single shot that we're going to take, but we discuss the DNA of the film, whatever it is, whatever we're going to shoot. So you discuss how you're going to tell the story, what is the kind of camera work, what is the visual style of this film. So fundamentally, we're already in agreement about all of that. But yeah, of course, I come on to set sometimes and he's like, no, I don't think this is working, or let's try it another way. And, we discuss it. We try and see at the end of the day, what is correct for the film has to work. And that what is correct for the film is what should win at the end. It's not about the director winning or the cinematographer winning or my ego or his ego. At the end, what is correct? If what he's saying is correct for the film, then that's what we do. Sometimes if I'm saying what I'm saying is correct for the film, we discuss it and then we do that. But I think if everyone is on that same page where you know that it is the script that leads the way, and that is what we are all serving. We're not serving some great visual which is going to stand apart later on and not tell that story. Then it doesn't work. So at the end of the day, when sometimes you see a film and you're like, the film was crap, but it was beautiful cinematography, then I think it's failed. And the cinematographer has failed as well. Because that's not the intention, is to showcase your own skill. It is to serve the story above all else when you're shooting a narrative piece of work.
Just one last question I'd like to add before we go ahead was somebody's asked that how, till what point were you involved in the post process of Airlift, or did it end once the film was finished shooting?
No, so I don't think it ends. It doesn't end for us, but of course there is a break because once you finish shooting, they start editing, which is a long drawn process. So Airlift also had a lot of visual effects work, which is when we do come back in. So you constantly have interaction and feedback with VFX and stuff like that. And then you come back for the grade, which is for the digital intermediate. So we get into the grade post when the edit is locked. And for me, the look of Airlift, which I think now is quite, it's got quite a strong visual style, which came from a particular photograph. It was just one photograph I'd seen in Kuwait during that time. It's about these two girls walking in burqas in a street. I don't even know where it is anymore. But it was a film, it was shot on film, and that visual was stuck in my head. And that it just sometimes takes a photograph, and people ask this question about what is your inspiration sometimes, or is it films, or it can be anything. It can come from a newspaper magazine, it can come from a painting. Very rarely for me does it come from another film, like very, very rarely. It very often comes from a still image. It could be a photographer or sometimes a journalist's image or painting, some classical paintings. So that was the image that got, kind of was fixed in my memory. And that's what gave it that very distinct visual style.
I believe Devang has also received a couple of questions on chat. Devang, if you would want to add here.
Yeah, there's a question, Priya, here, which is, so Airlift has a very interesting color correction, which has a little warm tone feel overall. So how much does a DOP has a say in color correction?
That was 100% mine. That's my job. Color correction is my job. So I have a great colorist I've been working with for, I think, 15 years now. His name is Rob Lang. And so we've been working together so long that when I have something in my head, it's very easy for me to translate. And that's what it is about working with people for very long. It's not necessary that you're using technical words to try and deconstruct what the image I'm seeing, but I can explain it to him visually. And we worked out the look, and it is, and that's how it came upon. I don't want to, I just said that earlier. So it is completely, that's part of your job, and your job isn't over, and you don't get paid till you complete the color correction. That is a part of what we're paid for, to answer Devang's question quite clearly.
That was from one of the participants. There's another question from Vidya Lakshmi. Does it ever happen that you shoot in terms of an idea of yours and then another idea of a director to see which one is the best for the film? No.
We will come upon that before. I don't think we have the luxury of saying we'll do my way and your way and then we'll take it later. One must have the maturity, and I think to be able to take that call beforehand, because the amount of resources that go into doing that, and then you're expending energy on two and you don't know which one you're going to keep. So you might as well come to that decision earlier and then do one and do it better and spend the resources for both into that one approach that you're taking. It never works in the long run. Let's do this also, let's do that also, and then we'll decide later post. That's how advertising works, because advertising is by consensus. You've got agency, client, and everybody else on set, and the pet dog, and everyone's got their opinions about which way, which shot is going to work. But film, I don't think that's really the way it should work. So these decisions should be made beforehand.
There's a question from Arush. If you would like to share some of the challenges that you faced during the shoot of Airlift action scenes. Some challenges, anything in particular?
Yes, actually, apart from the fact that shooting action is a challenge, we were shooting in Russell Khema, as I mentioned, which is one of the Emirates. And now we were setting up all these streets, we were burning cars, there was a lot of night work up there. And the one thing that you can't do in Russell Khema is use a laser pointer. So while your crew is trying to work and point 1 kilometer down the line and tell someone put a light there, you can't use a laser pointer because it's a security hazard in the Middle East or something like that. It's some crazy stuff. So every time my assistants wanted to do that, you had to walk there and you had to point everything out. And one person didn't know what they had to do. So he put on his laser pointer and he's like, that's where you put that light. And in the next 5 minutes, there were 4 cop cars that came, surrounded this poor fellow from all sides and just and somebody had to intervene and actually sort out that situation. So shooting in the Middle East, when you're trying to shoot an action film like this, as you could see it was very, very tricky because we were physically burning things. We were burning, sections of buildings. We were blowing up stuff. There was not that much visual effects and all of that. It was live. So it was a very trying and testing thing to do. And apart from the usual stuff, I'm going to tell you some of the funny stories because these are the weird ones. And of course, you've got everyone on walkie-talkies and the crew is communicating with each other. And on one channel, you've got something called the CID, which is their local cops as well. They're monitoring every chat because if you use bad language, you have it. And on a film crew, there's not one person who doesn't use bad language. So again, every time someone's saying something and saying, oh, you asshole, something like that, you've got one CID person standing in front of you. Like, cannot use bad language. So trying to shoot a film without bad language, that was the most trying part of an action film, let me tell you.
That's a great one. There's another question, and just in continuation to what you just said, is from Krishna. How do you manage to maintain cool when you are shooting on a day where there is a high budget of rental cost and you have to finish the shoot on that particular day?
I think that's a good question because I think when you're younger, you do tend to get very het up and riled up. And I think it becomes detrimental to the work you're trying to achieve because you get so emotionally involved in I'm not talking about the script, but you get so emotionally involved in trying to achieve the day that you're using, your attention gets diverted from what you actually need to do. And I think the older I've gotten, the more you're able to put blinkers on and say, okay, yeah, we do have a tough day. We do have all of this, but just, just focus yourself. And I think a lot of silence, just shut yourself out from everything else. And the day actually proceeds a lot smoother. I think when we're younger, you spend a lot of energy, you expend a lot of energy by doing 100 other things and, trying to make sure everything is done. And I think I've just learned to close myself in and just take a very narrow path. And I find it far more efficient and far more energy saving.
Great. I think lots of questions coming in. We'll let you go with the rest of the talk and then we'll take the questions.
Yeah. I'd like to bring Anis in now, who's been sitting and waiting patiently in center stage. So Anis and I do all our underwater work together. And what we're going to do is a couple of our recent jobs that we've done. The first one that we did, we're going to talk about 2 today. One is Booth, which I believe has just come out on Amazon a couple of days ago. It's a film with Vicky Kaushal. So for whoever hasn't seen it, it's a horror film. It's based on a shipwreck of Juhu. And there's a certain sequence that we shot where Vicky goes underwater and he's seeing some stuff. So I'm going to let you see this and then we'll come back and we'll discuss with Anis how we actually achieve this. Okay. One second. So, this was Juhu Beach, and this was a tough one to shoot because the waters at Juhu Beach are so polluted. Imagine trying to get in there and, to make sure that we have clarity in the water, that it's visible. And so this was a difficult one for us to actually do more because of the pollution level of the water. So since it's impossible to actually do that, we'll show you a video of how we actually achieve this and then get into it. welcome to the make-believe world of Bollywood. So we don't do any underwater shoots in the sea. I mean, we do, but this was not it. I'm gonna just do a little quick run through and then I'll give it to Anis. So how we do this normally is we are also trained to be scuba divers, because to shoot underwater you have to be a trained scuba diver. So I'm a cinematographer and a scuba diver. And this scene we actually shot in a pool where we set up a blue screen underwater, as you could tell, with tracking marks and things like that. And Anis trained Vicky to actually breathe off the tank, as you saw all of that. And then we shot this in a pool, and in visual effects later on, it was entirely replaced and it was made to look like dirty Juhu Beach, which they did a fantastic job of. So I'm going to hand this over to Anis now, who's going to tell us a little bit about how we actually shoot underwater and what his job is underwater, because we work together in conjunction. Because till Anis has had a go with the actors and the training and the safety, I can't do my job at all because I'm completely dependent on his half of the job. So I'm going to hand it over to Anis.
Hi guys. So it's very important where we start with meeting the producer and the director, and they tell us what they want to do and to achieve what they have to do. So the most important part is that first thing I would tell the director that we need to train the actors. They have to train, and even if they're not certified divers or don't know how to swim, then it's my job to see that they get really comfortable, because I want an actor to look really happy and comfortable in front of the camera. When Priya is shooting, she knows exactly what's going to happen. So we look after the training process. So we may have a day or 2 or 3 days training, and maybe on the day of the shoot also, just to familiarize the actor. So like Vicky was super sporty and he loved the whole space. Initially he was scared because I worked with him earlier on another film called Masan. It was his first film. But that was a simple shot. But this was tough so that he could be underwater and spend a lot of time. I didn't want him to keep going up, and it was a 20-foot pool, it's quite deep. So for him to be down there, to be calm, be comfortable. So obviously we went through the basic training of scuba diving with him so that he could understand what he needs to do, and if he's in any kind of stress, he has to look at me. And I was right next to him at all times, looking after his safety. So that's what my job is, to entirely look after the entire production when the shoot is on. I don't want Priya to worry about, is this guy going to perform? I said, you don't worry, you worry about your lighting, you worry about your framing, and you do all that, and I'll look after what needs to be done around the set. So that's what happens, and then we really trained him hard. And Vicky was he had a lot of fun doing it, and he was so happy. And at the end of the day, he's been, making funny gestures and fooling around in the water with us. And we taught him how to blow rings and so on and so forth. And, it's great. So he really appreciated that. And I guess we keep working with this. And Priya and me we've been working for a very long time now. And in fact, the first time when I met Priya is when she was assisting Gopa, that she started off with. And there was a Kingfisher campaign and they wanted somebody to operate the camera. So I operated the camera, holding it underwater with a tank. And then slowly and steadily, there was a film that happened. And I said, Priya, you need to train, and let's get you guys trained, certified, so that I can look after what I need to do. So that's how it all started. And Underwater Film Services is a company that we have that does all the underwater production bits. So if I get a call from a producer, I go meet them, and then immediately, Priya, you need to do this. How are your dates? Let's meet again. And then we take it forward from there. The training of actors is top priority so that they're comfortable. And obviously then setting up. So like the entire fabric that has to be put in the water. I've got a team of safety divers, all certified instructors, dive masters who are very happy, and a little bit of film background, so they understand. So I'm also a little bit of film background because I learned how to work with ad films, but as a production slave. So I know what goes into filmmaking, and then obviously putting it all together in this medium is fantastic. So it works.
So just to take it ahead from what Anis said, apart from, as he said, we have a crew underwater who, they have some film knowledge. But apart from that, what we also have, as you could have seen there, we have an underwater focus puller who actually is underwater gaffer. We actually have slowly over the years formulated an underwater camera crew as well, which is as good as any in the world, fully trained and proficient. And so we function like an entire film unit above water, we function underwater now. Any questions? Because I'm sure here you'd have some.
So there's one by someone called Bhavpreet Ghai. She is asking for underwater shooting. You need mandatory diving certification. Do you need to keep renewing this license? How does it work?
Uh, for instructors who have to be in teaching status, but for me, I need a dive master who is a professional and is a responsible person underwater and can look after others. So yes, an instructor needs to keep being in teaching status by completing some courses online and so on and so forth. But otherwise, it's kind of a lifetime certification, and you're constantly diving and training and so on and so forth. So yeah, you need to be a certified diver for sure. So there's a crew that means somebody needs to do an underwater shoot, like say a DOP or a cameraman or a photographer. And my first question to them is, can you dive? He's saying, no, I can swim. But I said, then you need to train, because I need to train the DOP first, and then I need to train the actors. It depends on the location we're shooting. The training is not required.
There's another question, and I think this will be for Priya from Dheer. How different does a lens behave when shooting underwater, and what are the main differences when shooting underwater?
Ooh, we're doing geek speak. I like this. Uh, so what happens is that kind of a rule of thumb for lensing underwater is it has a magnification of about 25%. So every lens on land, you kind of magnify it by 25%, and that's the magnification you're going to get underwater with the same lens. So we take that as a rule of thumb, and that's how we work with the lensing. What we try to do when you're shooting underwater is not use many long lenses. So you try to stick to the wider end of lensing so that you have less water body between the lens and the character. Because the more water you have, the more out of focus the water will go, and the more blurry your image is going to look, to put it plainly. So one tries to use wider lenses closer in, even if to get the same magnification of a close-up, or instead of going on a longer lens. You just get a much crisper image.
Great. There's another one from Sparsh. It's a longish question. So I would like to know from Priya about my underwater video skills. I'm trained in diving up to advanced open water level with specialization in cameras and rescue diving. What's the best way to spend more time underwater and hone my skills, and who would be the people in the industry to show it to get into this professionally? I do have experience creating and shooting film and ad for the web.
Anis Aidenwala, please hold up your business card, and at the end of there's your, you can do this. Yeah. I think, I want to just step in for a second, because I think what happens when we're doing something like underwater cinematography, one gets very wrapped up with the skill of the diving. Of course, that's very important, because if you can't dive, it's like, if you can't hold a camera, you can't walk, you can't do handheld. But so to answer his question in another manner, yes, hone your skills in diving and do all of that, and sort out all those things. At the end of the day, the reason I do what I do also is because I'm a cinematographer equally, if not more. So I have my storytelling capabilities are as strong. And I need to be able to, because I'm not shooting, Nat Geo or shooting stuff like that in the wild where I have the open ocean. I need to actually recreate sequences underwater, and I need to light for them. So never forget that part of what you do. The diving is there, but primarily you're a cinematographer. And that part of your skill shouldn't go don't explore that any less. It doesn't become all about the diving. I think it should figure out the diving, but make it all about the cinematography, because eventually that's what it is. It's underwater cinematography. That shouldn't be the backbone.
Anish wants to know what time of the day is generally the best for shooting underwater, because lighting changes a lot when you go deep.
So we don't, a lot of the stuff that we shoot in swimming pools. It's like shooting on a set. So we recreate our lighting. I would rather not shoot in daylight outdoors because it's, again, as Anish just said, it's very difficult to get lighting continuity. So often what we do is, even for day work, we shoot at night and we recreate ambience for day, and we create sun so that we can have a 12-hour day like we do on a studio. So we create for that and we try to work. But if you have to shoot in a pool, because a lot of the work that I do is action sequences underwater and things like that, it's not simple. So then you do it over multiple days because your working hours are very short. So one likes to have as much control as we can. We don't just work with available light because we're doing storytelling, which has continuity in lighting, and it takes a certain period of time, So let's show the other clip and then we can come back, because I think that's an interesting clip as well.
Yeah, just give me a second.
This is from a film called Saira with Chiranjeevi. It's a Telugu film. We shot this at the end of last year.
Oops.
A nod for the head. So this is a sequence in this film. We shot in Kerala. There's a submerged temple out there, and they were shooting outside as well. So we went in for the underwater part, and we had to achieve this with Chiranjeevi, who again Anish had trained, and to be able to execute the entire sequence. Now we'll just show you a couple of clips of the temple, and then we'll come back to this.
You want me to play the other one also?
So as you can see, that's how the temple was underwater. This is basically to show you guys that how, it's very difficult for us to shoot in real locations, because as you can imagine, even if there is something that is submerged, the visibility of the water, the safety of the water, actors, things like that. So as much as we can, we recreate things in a pool like you would recreate in a studio. So even for this temple, as that section of the temple was created, they lift the whole thing with an industrial crane, and then in a deep pool, it's submerged in the water, and the sequences, as you saw. Anish had to train Chiranjeevi to dive and do the sequence. He wasn't very comfortable, so what we did is, as you saw, if you saw the temple, it had legs on it. So we keep lifting the set and we lower the set depending on the capability of the actor, the requirement of the scene, or what we need. So it allows us to be deeper in the water or shallower. The normal depth of the pool that we work in is about 20 feet. So it gives us a lot of leeway to shoot. The sun that you saw in that sequence, in a couple of shots, it was a real sun. Of course, we shot this over 4 or 5 days. And in a lot of the shots, it was basically big lights booming in from cranes to make it look like simulated sunlight. So it pretty much is like a studio underwater. Whatever you would do in a studio, we do in a pool. It's just, it's the same thing actually, just in a different environment.
Quite controlled. When you are doing it in a pool, it's very controlled because we need to have the kind of lighting that goes in the set and the comfort of the actor. So for Chiranjeevi to walk and pull the guy, the set had to just go in like 6 feet, and it was fine. So he could just submerge and do his bit. But yeah, again, coming back to the training bit, it's again important. So also he had a double who was doing the work and who spent a lot of time training with us, and it's great. So, and it looked really great, and the stunt directors were fantastic. The best line they told Priya is that she's the only lady working on that set with us. And he wanted to tell his wife that you cut vegetables and she cuts light, something like that.
Yeah, that's right. There were these two Telugu, they're two brothers, they're twins, and their names are Ram and Lakshman, and they're identical twins. And they speak no English or Hindi, they only speak Telugu, and they're absolutely wonderful. And they just kept smiling at me the whole time, and which is when he came and told me this line. He said, like my wife cuts vegetables, you cut light. So it was, yeah, I was the only woman on that set. There were 150 men because it was a Telugu set. They had come to Bombay for the shoot. And at one point, there was a security person who refused to let the actress's makeup person because she was told that this is a complete male set because Chiranjeevi Garu does not like women. So the woman comes up to me and she goes, Priya, they're not letting me on set. So I looked at the guy. I said, what's the problem? He said, oh, I never saw any other woman here. So I assumed no women are allowed. So to answer the question about how many women on any set, even till today, sometimes I'm the only woman on a set of 150 people. So the penetration is rather slow, I think, in terms of how many women are working. Bombay, there's a lot more, but I think down south, it's still very, very low.
Okay, there is a question from Dheer, and I'm just going to bring him up here. So, Dheer, go ahead. You can ask a question.
Okay. First of all, thank you so much to F.Stop and everybody to do this. It's really, really helpful. Thank you so much, Priya ma'am, for coming and joining us. It's really helpful. So I had few questions related to lighting underwater. One was that how do you create your fill and negative underwater? It's very easy to create fill and negative when you're shooting over water, but how do you do that? And also another question, I was not very able to understand what you meant by saying 25 mm with the lens. So would like you to explain that once again if it's okay. And also the fact that when you say there is no depth of field because you're shooting a lot wide. So then how do you, if you have multiple characters or if you have a single character, how do you play with that?
Okay, let me start with your first question about fill and negative. So, since there are not many tools that we have, like as you're above water, it's much easier to do all these things. We don't have too many tools underwater. So we keep trying to improvise and come up with stuff to do it. So one way we do it is we use a lot of cranes when we're in the water. So you take like big crane with a 12 by 12 black and bring it in over the water because as you can imagine, a pool has no space for us to actually put any stands down. So what we do is use a lot of stuff from outside and we bring things inside over. So to create negative, to create light, to create fill, or we put maybe black on one side of the pool to create negative underwater, black everywhere, white on one side. So that's how we do it. We just have to, you're constantly improvising because there is no tried and tested method. It's all just experience based. And every year we learn new things. I learn new things from what I've done from the previous job. So that's how we do that part of it. When I said lenses, now imagine you take a 16 mm lens on land. You pretty much know what magnification you're going to get at 2 feet or 3 feet. When you take it in the water, because of refraction, your 16 mm becomes like an 18 or 18, 19 mm. It just gets magnified because of refraction. When you put your hand into a glass of water, you'll always see it refracted and the bottom part will be slightly magnified. Yeah. So it's just a magnification that happens in the water. So we give it a rule of thumb of about 25% is how much it gets magnified by, so that it's easy for us to understand. It's not accurate, but that's pretty much where it is. So if you want to use a 16 mm above land, on land, you would probably take a 14 mm in the water because you'd get equivalent of a 16 mm when you get into the water. And it's not depth of field. The issue is you try not to shoot too wide open underwater, because also for the focus puller, it's very, very hard. Because people are moving, even I'm moving, the camera's breathing, the person's moving. So you try and shoot at least by 5.6 or something like that, so that the image is sharp. Because also don't forget, a lot of the work that we do is for projection to the big screen. So if you start having, mushy focus and stuff, I'm not a big fan of that. So to get certain amount of crispness, we try and shoot stop down. So wider lens is obviously always better for more depth of field. And also the distance of water between, now if I'm on a long lens, I'll have more water between, say, the character and the camera, right? Now, if there's, even at 5.6, the more water I have between the character and myself, the more out focus that water is going to be. So you're going to get this big body of mushy water. So even if your character is sharp, it's still not going to be crisp. So it's just better to be closer in with a wider lens always. Anything else?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay, thank you, dear. I'm just gonna ask Vidya. Okay, Vidya, if you're there, you can ask a question to Priya.
Hello. Actually, I have some doubts regarding your 2-3 underwater thing. The one is about the one you showed that you are in the water. So how do you put the blue screen or the green screen underwater? One was that question, and another, you showed the Saira movies clip where what I felt was there are multi-camera. So did you use multi-camera for that, or only the single camera? That was my second question. And the third is as you said in the initial stage when you mentioned about the booth movie, this. So do you have some dedicated crew for the underwater, like you have set up the team, or is it like the director or the producer gives you the team for that? So
Okay.
how do you decide?
What do you do exactly, Vidya? I just want to understand what your background is before we.
Just I am into the filmmaking student. I'm in.
Okay, I've lost. What's the first question? How do we put the backgrounds down? I'm going to let Anis answer that, because that's, so we, our jobs, because it's, we're a very small team underwater. So we pretty much divide everything between him and myself. So I'm going to let him answer that question about how they put the background, because that itself is a whole other skill.
Hi, Vidya. You look very familiar. Are you the one with the little nanny who does the Snapchat ones?
No, sir.
No. Sorry.
I don't use Snapchat.
Okay. No. So obviously the dimensions of the pool are measured, and we know the pool, and everything is it's a rolled fabric. It's like either a flex sheet or tarpaulin or whatever, but everything needs to be clean. So it's rolled in the opposite manner, and it's rolled downwards with the weight at the bottom. So the fabric goes straight down like a curtain, and it sits on the wall. Now, if you got to also cover the bottom of the pool, which has the tiles, and you don't want to expose the tiles because your camera is looking downwards, what we do is same thing is taken down and then unrolled. So obviously there are many more divers helping to do that, and they're all certified either dive masters or instructors who are doing the job for the specific moment. And they would take the fabric down on the two rods which are rolled, and they will unroll it underwater, and then obviously the fabric will bubble up because it's sometimes loose, so we need to add weight to it so it settles down at the bottom and it's flat. We also sometimes put it on a frame and slide the frame in the water and just place it at the bottom. Easy. But again, you're in the water, you're doing all this, so everything slows down. So we need around, say, 2.5 to 3 hours to cover the entire pool if need be for a specific area.
Okay, so to answer your second question was about booth and the team, right? You said, does anyone provide the team? Is that what your question was?
Yeah, it is about that you have the team and you do that underwater full crew handling the camera and other things, or they would be providing you with the crew.
Nobody tells us what to do. We do it ourselves. So Anis and I basically have put together a team over years and years and years, where it's very hard to put together this team, because what you're trying to get is a very mixed skill set. People have to be diverse. They have to be, filmmaking background, camera background. So you're trying to find all, so it's taken us very, very long. And now we have a reasonable sized team. Reasonable size, not in terms of a normal film set. A normal film set will have, to do the same kind of job, will have, I think, 100 people. We're barely 8 of us in the water. So it's a very hard and physical job. But we have the team which we've built up over years. Anis runs a dive school. So people come to him, they get trained whenever he feels like, they're maybe showing some interest to do this, or they're capable, then they come into the film part of the job. And that's how we've developed this team. And it's been a very slow, painstaking process, because it's a tough job. It's also physically very demanding. So it's a team that's been built up by us. And for the third question, for Saira, it's not a multicam setup, because to get even one camera with an underwater housing, I think you saw it in those clips. The cost of one of those is about, we use a normal Alexa camera, which we put into the housing. So I think it's about $250,000 for one setup. So we have only one in India at this moment, and I don't think we'll be getting one anytime soon. So it's a very expensive thing also. Underwater shoots are expensive. So that is just one camera, but it's shot in that manner, very, very deliberately, where it looks like, it's jumping access, it's going here, there. So it's shot in that manner. And not to forget, it's a Telugu film. So they like to cut like that, this very kind of jagged cutting. So it's a single camera setup, because it's a very expensive setup.
Thank you so much, you.
Thank you, Vidya.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm just gonna unmute our panelists, and Samar has a question, and then Swapan has a question.
Easy.
One
I'm back. Yeah.
Oh, that was quick. No, I really love this. I've seen a couple of shoots with friends, working, well, mostly documentary, which is very limited with gear, obviously, unless you are working for some major Nat Geo, expedition or something. Feature film has a very different crew. But talking about diving, are you a diver otherwise? I mean, obviously, it's just not, you go just for your film shoots. Are you a diver, and where all do you dive if you do?
I'm not going to look at Anis while answering this, because I haven't been out of a swimming pool in the last 4 years because of schedule and work. Right. But yeah, of course, yes, I'm a diver. And Anis runs many dive boats and dive expeditions and trips. So we've done Komodo, Maldives, Mauritius, everywhere. Like that's what, and that is I think that's the part of it that one holds for one's soul before jumping into dirty swimming pools for 4 days with cars and oil and crappy atmospheres. But absolutely, yes, Anis is going to say something.
So when I saw Priya working on the job, and I said you need to certify, we were on immediately, I think in a matter of 15 to 20 days, we were doing a dive trip to Lakshadweep. And then I said, you come to Lakshadweep, because I used to live in Lakshadweep first, and I used to run a dive school there. So that's when Priya came, and we certified her, and she loved it. And immediately there was a shoot that had to happen, and they said, okay, we're going back to Lakshadweep for a shoot. So it all fell into place. And then, so you have to just keep diving for sure to be comfortable in the water. So that's why when I have a trained DOP who's going to shoot and is a diver, I'm not worried. They look after the camera, they look after themselves, the safety is there. My eye is on them at a point for sure, but constantly looking into the production and the safety of everybody, because water, electricity, dangerous. You need to be really careful. So that's my job, to see that everything goes. We've done many shoots, and touch wood, we've not had any issues and incidents, because I'm a different person on set. I'm quite loud and quite noisy, and look after everything that goes well.
He's quite a bad word that we're not allowed to use on walkie-talkies.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Priya, there's an interesting question.
Swapan had a question, and then Vinay.
Okay,
Yeah, after you, Swapan, please.
Hi, Priya. Thank you so much. It's wonderful to just see a cinematographer and how they work. Like there was a talk by Sudeep, and at that time, Sudeep Chatterjee, another cinematographer, and I always said that we make, as photographers, we make such a big deal about the frame, a frame, and how we approach it, and it's just amazing. You guys are probably running it 24 of them in a second, but so full respect for that. But what I really wanted to ask you is maybe slightly away from cinematography, but because you mentioned the gender was a big obstacle in getting into wherever you are today, and you did mention it a few times in your talk till here. I'm just very curious that as a cinematographer, obviously you have your core team that you work with, and like even in photography we have our assistant, first assistant, people that you're comfortable working with, and you mentioned that. So I'm very curious that as a cinematographer today who probably has a much more of a say because of your body of work, would you be conscious about the fact that your immediate crew would also be women? Because they may not get breaks. Like you said, it's tough to get into this probably male-dominated space. Would that cross your mind, or do you have women in your immediate crew? Or
okay, let me answer that. So I'll tell you what, that's a really valid question. And at this particular moment, I don't have any women in my crew because I have 2 assistants. I have only 1 focus puller and 1 assistant, and they've been with me for about 9 years or 10 years. Right. So I keep a very small team, and I try and work very lean because that's how I like to work. Although what I try to do on every job, in which I have achieved now in the last couple of films and whatever series work I've been doing, is I try and at least get a woman intern on every job. And I like to pay for that person myself. And I make sure that, so for every feature project, that there's someone there from the beginning to the end. And what I did on Chef actually is I didn't carry someone from Bombay. What I did was ask the local production people to find someone in each city because we were traveling a lot. So in Cochin, we had somebody different. In Delhi, we got a girl from some film set up there. So if I go to Dubai to shoot, I try and get someone there. So I'm constantly trying to find, even if I can't carry people with me, because I have my team, which honestly I've been working with for so long, at least where one can get exposure for people, I try and get them onto the set, because absolutely, the doors are not open equally at all. And to elaborate on this a bit, a few of us started this a couple of years ago called the Indian Women Cinematographers Collective. About 5 of us from Bombay, because there's somebody from Kerala as well. And the idea was to actually just collate the number of women cinematographers and assistants in the country to see where we are, because it's we're in pockets everywhere and we don't really know. And we came up with this enormous number, which we didn't know was existing, about 100.
Wow.
There are only 100 women, 120 women, between cinematographers, assistants, interns, just graduating film school in the country. And the idea of doing this was to provide some sort of support group and to find openings and to have just a forum where they could interact, talk, ask questions, and to allow openings like this to get hired, to hire each other. And what ends up happening is, I always hear this thing about reverse sexism. Oh, so, women will only hire women. And, and it's just ironic that these are questions that still come up, because I think it comes from such a myopic mind that, that this is some great privilege that women are hiring women. And so, to counter these things, we actually started this collective. So it may not be on a daily basis that I can bring somebody onto my set every time, but one is trying to do it in many other ways.
To break the vicious cycle of in some way.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, there was a comment and a question. Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah. So there was a question and a comment saying that most photographers, apart from doing commercial work, would also pursue some work which is a personal work and very close to them. Right? Is there something that you're working on which would be your personal work, or is there something that you hope that you can work on sometime as a cinematographer?
When you do narrative work as a cinematographer, the work that you're doing is pretty personal, because eventually you're telling a story. It's not just so. every film that I'm on and every project that I'm on is very personal. This is not a cop-out to try and get away from answering your question. But for us, when we're doing narrative work, it takes 6 months of to a year of your life. And you are putting yourself into that storytelling. So it is very, very personal. So for me, the work that I do is very personal in terms of the narrative work that I shoot.
So apart from films, are there any documentaries also that you're working on, or some that you would want to mention? Or
no, I'm not doing any documentaries at the moment. My time gets taken actually by a lot of advertising work and film work and the studio that I run. So that pretty much covers 24-hour day.
And somebody also asked if you could share some experiences about Chef, because it was quite a different film and a very different treatment. So if there's something that you would want to share about it.
Oh, nice. Somebody wants to know about Chef.
Yeah.
So Chef was, I actually enjoyed shooting that film a lot because I think after Airlift, we went on the floor 8 months after we finished that film. And I think what happens is when you work on films, you have to actually leech yourself of the previous job that you've done and to forget everything in terms of style, in terms of content, all the things that you have brought on and held so closely, which become your DNA for that period. You have to let go of all of it and hopefully find something new to be able to tell a story, it was nothing to do with, of course, the previous film I'd done. And films are not, one is not like the other. But I really wanted to shed all of that and to find a very, very new visual style for myself. I don't mean, some breakthrough visual style, but something new in terms of the way I wanted to capture that film. And it was a very easy and light and breezy kind of film. And it sounds very easy for us to say, easy, light, breezy, just capture it and go there. But it never works like that. It takes so much work to have something look accidental. And I think that's where the beauty in those things is, that to get that sense of just grabbed, where you're not staging it so hard, you're not, it's not so locked down and so fixed, and you kind of far more fluid and light. So I think to get that to me, and I think I managed to get that. And that was quite interesting because at the end of the day, we are just a summation of all our bodies of work. And this is another thing that I did learn to do, how to shoot a film in that style. It was very visual, it was very cosmetic, and a complete departure from what I had done earlier, and very upbeat. So how to keep that, I think, then keep that DNA going through it is also because in a feature, consistency of style is very important, because it's not about achieving it for one particular sequence or another sequence. But if you're going to shine in a particular manner, then it better shine for the entire film. Otherwise, it looks inconsistent and erratic. Yeah. So a lot of hard work to make it look very easy for Chef.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you. I believe Fauzan had something to share or ask.
Yeah. Let me confess, I haven't seen Airlift, but whenever any speaker comes here, be it a cinematographer or a filmmaker, I check the movie after the session is over. So I'm going to check the Airlift. And also I like the way I am a documentary photographer. So what little I saw that approach in a very documentary way. You have shot the entire thing. So it's going to make my day. In fact, I'm going to check the movie after this. Okay. The question is, did you visit Kuwait before doing this movie? Have you been to that place to have a Reiki kind of a thing?
We couldn't go. They wouldn't allow us. So we wanted to go. And we wanted to go, but we didn't get any visas to go. So I did a lot of research, as since you said you're a documentarian, I did a lot of the Time magazine and Time Life had a lot of books done by journalists during that time of Saddam's invasion into Kuwait. So I bought a lot of books. I did a lot of research online and tried to understand, much more about, we couldn't get to go. So I read a lot on that time and try and get into the ethos of what that place was. And I'll tell you something simple about it. So what I was trying to understand in a place like that, where it's desert, it's hot, it's sunny, the idea that everyone will have their windows wide open with the sun streaming in is not a reality. Okay, so now we have the interior of a house, but in the peak of daylight, everyone's windows are going to be shut and curtains are going to be drawn. Now, for the sake of my conceit and vanity, I could have opened the windows and had this beautiful shafts of light, but it would be incorrect. So to work those things around. So it was far more about just getting into the very, very small nuanced details of that kind of place during that kind of period is the best we could do. We really couldn't, we couldn't get there.
Okay, I let me say I was lucky to visit Kuwait much after this incident, and I took a day off from my official assignment to just see the landmarks which were bombarded and which were devastated, and how these people built it up again in a far better way, in fact.
Right.
My second question is, any movie internationally, they also end up doing it in the swimming pool, or they actually go, and would you recommend any movie that was very appealing to you in terms of underwater shooting?
I'll tell you what, two parts to your question. The first is, yes, even internationally, so in Pinewood Studios, they have a couple of, like in many places they do, but Pinewood being one of them, they have tanks. So they don't go to swimming pool, but they actually inside studios have water tanks where, they're glass tanks where they bring them up into the studio, they can light them, they can shoot indoors in a complete controlled atmosphere. Because for a lot of action stuff, whether you take any of the Bond films or any of these films, you can't really go out into the sea and shoot. It's not safe. It's not viable. Firstly, insurance will not allow the actors to do it. So yes, everyone in these situations, you end up shooting in a pool like you shoot in a studio. It really is akin to a studio underwater. And films that have been shot, of course, they're the usual, the big blue and things like that. But for me, being a cinematographer who shoots a lot of fiction work, the ones that actually recreate this stuff in swimming pools are the ones that are interesting, hardcore action sequences, because that's what gets, that's very exciting for me instead of going out into the beautiful ocean. For shooting, I love to dive in them, but for shooting, when you get to recreate this stuff in a pool and you get the manic of the, and the rush of shooting action, I'm quite happy doing it in a swimming pool. So I think that's the correct place to do it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, there is a question from Sriraj, so please go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for organizing this session. Thank you, ma'am, for answering our questions. Ma'am, my question is that how do you decide a look and color palette for the film? And how do you plan to light up for a certain look with the DA perspective?
So the look is not designed by me alone, of course. The look is a highly collaborative effort with the production designer, the director, the costume designer. Everybody comes on to designing a look. Obviously, the director, I'm not mentioning, but of course, it starts from there. Because there is a certain vision that the director would have, because he's, whether he's written the script or he's adapting the script, there is a certain thought and idea in his head. And that should be the starting point. So that is where the opening of the discussion will happen. For at least the films that I've worked on, I haven't worked on too many, but I'm telling you the ones that I have. So it starts from there, and then we sit together. It'll be the production designer, as I was mentioning. It'll even be the editor, it'll be the sound designer, because these are the kind of people that I've been working with regularly. I had the good fortune. These are hardcore filmmakers. So everybody has a point of view and an opinion on what the look should be. And we come upon it organically, but we come upon it collectively. And then once we have this look, and when it's a married vision of, and a singular vision of what a project should look like, then I think it really shows, because then you know that it's a singularity in the storytelling, in the narrative, in the visual, in everything. So it is a collective decision. It is never one person's decision. And it would be remiss for me to say that I ever have, designed the look of thing. It's never me alone. And it shouldn't be. It should come from the story and every person involved in storytelling.
I have one more question, ma'am. How do you select a set of lenses or a camera for a particular shoot?
I think, well, to be honest, camera-wise, it's what I'm comfortable with. I shoot on Alexa all the time because that's what I like. That's what I now understand. With digital cameras, I think the problem is there are about 1 million of them, and one has to start trying to get, because each one is so distinct, and I don't want to spend my time and energy getting to know various cameras, because I'd rather get to know my craft. So if I have a camera that is simple and allows me to do my job, and I can actually focus on the nuance of my job as opposed to decoding the electronics of a camera, I'd rather do that. So camera-wise, I shoot with Alexa, and lens-wise on the, it's, well, now one knows what various lenses do. So it's like paintbrushes. So you think about what you're doing, what would be the correct set of lenses, and you test a couple, and you come upon it. But by now, you know what the discerning features of various sets are. So you already find, you narrow it down from there, and then what you want to work with. Paintbrushes is what I would call it.
Sorry, Soumya, you have the next question.
Thank you so much, Priya, for sharing all your journey with us. Like Swapan said, for us photographers, I mean, every time we hear a cinematographer talk about what they do, we just feel like we're so much lesser in terms of our engagement with the medium. But I want to go back to the place where you started, where you're talking about how, people have questions about, is action shot differently because you're a woman? There's a photographer called Daniela Zalkman who says that when women cover conflict, then they have a tendency to move towards the quiet in the conflict. And I have to admit, I haven't seen a lot of your work, but with the clips that you've shown for Airlift, I do see that tendency to dwell into the human emotions rather than the wretchedness of the entire scene, and more towards the quiet. What's your thoughts on this? What do you think? That's a fair insight?
That's an interesting insight. What happens with cinematography, though, is we don't operate as, in isolation. One is always telling the story of the director or the script. So if I was out there on my own and I was covering conflict as a journalist or a documentarian, that would apply, I think. Or then that could be a discussion. But when we're doing a narrative piece of work and there's a script at the back and there's a director, a lot of it is guided by that as well. Now, would a director would a particular kind of director hire someone like me or women to tell a particular kind of human story because they believe women will tell it differently? That would be a bigger question. But by me going into the human side of conflict is in the script. It's not something that I put in there. Of course, my telling of it might be slightly different, but it's not that the director wanted to do this out and out macho action film and I suddenly took it into this human angle. That's not really, when we're doing narrative work, that's not how it works. So it's in the writing of it.
So there's another question coming up, and Siddhant, you are on.
Hi. So my question was regarding the underwater cinematography, and I wanted to ask you about how you pose or how do you read light underwater, and secondly, that do you light up everything from the exterior, or do you have underwater cages for lights and you light up from the interior as well?
So actually, that's a good question. So we have a light meter. We have a normal light meter, but we have a housing for it underwater. So we read light normally. So we read it at the point of incidence. It's not that we're trying to compensate for depth and absorption and things like that. We read light where it has to be read. We have underwater lights, but being in India, and we have a very scanty infrastructure in terms of underwater equipment. So we have very few lights underwater. We make do with what we have, but a large part of lighting happens from outside the water as well. But that's also how I like it because it's kind of much more natural. It's about lighting from a distance and bouncing it up from far. So we light a lot from outside, but it's not so simple for us to light from outside because it's not that we can put a light in the position we want to. You've got a big water body there, which is a big pool. So we use a lot of grids and we do a lot of rigging and cranes to bring lights into positions, even to get them to hover above the water where we need them to. Did that answer your question?
Yes. Thank you so much.
Great. And then we have one more question from Rahul. So Rahul, you're up.
Hi Priya, this is Rahul. I wanted to ask you, when was the first time in your life that you actually lifted a camera and felt you could make a career out of it? And I see that you went to a boarding school, Williams School in Dehradun, where a lot of weightage is given to extracurricular activities as much as academics probably. So was it there that you developed the interest, or was it later in your life? And second thing, after you got into photography, when was the first time that you actually thought that you could start taking up professional assignments underwater? Because not many people think of going underwater and taking up professional assignments.
So let me answer it backwards, your second question first.
Sure.
The time I thought I could take up an underwater assignment was, as Anis answered, after the assignment had happened. I mean, as inexperienced and foolhardy as I was, Anis called up and said, okay, there's an underwater shoot. I had zero training. We'd barely been certified for a month. And we went into the sea in Lakshadweep 1 month before the monsoon and could not hold the camera, could not balance the camera, put it on Anis's head, and we shot and made Anis turn left and right, and that's how we panned. So that's how the first underwater job happened. I think sometimes, yeah, poor Anis, I think that's why he lost his hair. So I think sometimes, you know, it is the just literally saying, you know, when you dive into the deep end and just do it and then work your way out of that mess that you kind of landed in. And in underwater, it was that. And I'm pretty glad it happened like that because I think if I had too much time to think about it, maybe, you know, you're so reticent and you'll overthink it because it's pretty hard. So just getting thrown in there and having to like literally work your way out of it was the way it happened. So I'm quite happy for that. And your second question was, when did I feel ready to? It wasn't in school at all, actually. It was actually when I went to NYU for that course, and I actually held a camera in my hands, and I felt that you know, I wanted to do something technical. I wasn't sure I wanted to be a filmmaker, but I knew it had to be something technical, and it was between sound and camera and sound and camera. It went back and forth. But the minute I had that camera in my hand, that was it.
Okay, great. So I think we just have one last question, which I'm gonna ask. This question is from Manawar Alam Khan. How does one decide on which aspect ratio the film is about to get shot? For example, Joker was not shot on 2:39:1, and neither on 16:9. So how does this get decided?
Well, it's a combination of studio, distribution, director. The bigger the film, the less the less control the cinematographer is going to have on aspect ratio. Because especially nowadays, when so much of distribution is happening on Netflix and stuff like that. So if you know, if they've already pre-bought it, then they have very strong opinions now on aspect ratio. So you might get to do theatrical at 2:35, but very quickly it's going to go 16:9 when you have to get onto Netflix and things like that. So you protect for it from the beginning. So these are decisions that, I mean, in an ideal situation, it should be the director and your call, you know, what aspect ratio, because it's your story. But in the real world, not so. Many other people take the call now, like the pet dog.
Okay. Before I ask you for your closing comments, I would just like Anis to say something as we end the session. Anis.
It was a very interesting discussion that happened, and yes, people have now got to know that there is a film unit that exists in India, and which is, I think, we've been doing this since 2003, and shot many films, and it's always a pleasure to work with Priya because she's always there to either, you know, if she's not available, at least she'll help me out to sort a few things out that I need to, and it's done. And the best line that I've heard from one of the life boys thing, "Aajkal to Priya madam top pe chal rahi hai underwater." How's that per se?
Yeah, we try not to get into the pervy side of those comments on this forum.
It was lovely. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anis. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Over to you, Priya. For
I just want to ask Priya,
yeah.
do you have a monopoly right now in India?
Do I have a monopoly right now? Yeah, I've bribed everyone to shoot with me. No, it's not like that. Yeah, you know, I end up because, as you know, we're so great to get slotted that when one gets slotted, you know, all the other work I do just goes to bloody dust. And people think I only shoot underwater. It doesn't matter whether I shot a feature or not, or how many I do. But for some reason, the underwater part stands tall, which I don't complain about. But yeah, I end up doing most of it.
Okay, but you know, in case if there's some other cinematographer doing a movie and you're only called for underwater, would you agree to do that?
I do it a lot actually, because it's not that I shoot the entire movie that I shoot underwater for, but I end up shooting all the underwater sequences for a lot of films. That's what I do primarily when I shoot underwater actually. So I'm called in only to shoot the underwater part. And it's actually really fun because that's the only time as a cinematographer you get to collaborate with another DP. Otherwise, we always work in isolation, you know. So for the underwater part, as you know, you get to collaborate, you can design stuff with each other, bounce off ideas. Otherwise, we exist in these little vacuums with just ourselves on a set. So I enjoyed a lot because I've got to work with so many DPs and, you know, the best in the country, sometimes some of the best in the world, where it becomes a collaborative thing, which is quite unique in our jobs because otherwise we function independently.
Also, if I may just add two things that you said, again, not a question, but which I found very, very, very interesting. It's basically said in filmmaking, you're serving a script. And what I kind of decode that, it's like you're serving a script, you're not really serving your visual ego. And you kind of pinned advertising in a slightly different way. And advertising is by consensus, which I thought was fabulously put, you know. Advertising
True,
is like,
right?
yeah, I mean, what it kind of puts it in.
It's pretty true.
No, it's beautiful. And you, like you said, you go see a film and you come back seeing the cinematography. It hasn't worked. You know, it's part of the narrative. And so true.
I think, you know, just to elaborate on that a bit, because I think it's interesting, is again, the more experience you have, I find it's a matter of vanity, you know, to put your vanity at the back. Because this happens, and my assistant says that on set sometimes. You know, I light something and I'll be like, no, we need to redo this. It's too flashy. In the beginning, he asked me, he goes, what do you mean it's too flashy? I said, it's looking great, but it's just not right for this moment. You know, it's drawing too much attention to itself. But I think it takes a certain level of maturity and years of working to say, you know what, put yourself back. It's not about me at this moment, and it's not serving what has to be told, and you know, to move on.
No, and then it's disguised. It's a disguised art, no, in the sense, and that's more beautiful rather than in your face. You know, it's like
exactly.
Great, thank you.
Priya, there is Arush who wants you to share some words for young cinematographers.
Leave, go find another job.
Photographers are saying it, now cinematographers. Oh my God.
You know, okay. On a serious note, leave, go find another job. You know what? It's just hang in there. That's all you can do. And I think watch. I think what happens sometimes is when people come out of film school, you tend to think that you've learned and studied, and study is that's it. You're done with it. But study is a dynamic process, and I think you continue doing for the rest of your life. So I would say, if you're up and coming and learning, just keep learning. And I think that is the biggest gift you can give yourself. And that's in your control. Getting work isn't in your control, but making sure that you keep learning and studying and watching is. So do that.
Great. Thank you so much. First of all, I think we would like to thank Anis Sadinwala for being here in this session. Thank you so much, Anis. I think it was great for all the participants to hear from you, and you know, a lot of discussion around underwater photography and diving.
I do get many questions of people about wanting to be an underwater cinematographer. So my first question again is, do you dive? If not, then let me teach you first.
Yeah.
You can take a camera in your hand because that's very expensive. I can't have it leaking underwater in your hand. Sorry.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Anis. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much.
And thank you so much to Priya for your session. It was wonderful. And I think both the aspects where you covered first the above the ground part of your cinematography, and then underwater. It was really intriguing for all of the participants, and a lot of questions have actually come in, a lot of comments as well, and we will be happy to share it with you over email once, although a lot you answered as well. So it was great. We would also like to say a big thank you to Sudeepda for you know, getting you here on this platform, and we are so happy that you did this session with us. So thank you from all of us, from all the participants and all the panelists, and from F.Stop. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you all. Thanks. Just grateful to be able to discuss film and cinema and not jhadu and katka. So
Left pan, right pan, same thing.
That anyway the men are doing it. Don't worry.
Left pan, right pan, and dustpan.
Thank you so much, Priya. Thank you.
Thank you for
Thank you,
having me.
Priya.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna quickly share a glimpse of the last 4 sessions that we have. So tomorrow is Prashant, and then followed by Anil on 26th, Ketkiji on 27th, and Amito on 28th. That's the lineup. And if you still haven't registered for any of these sessions, the registrations are open. The link is there on our Instagram and our Facebook as well. So go on to linktr.ee/fstop photo and register for these upcoming sessions. And we hope to see you again soon on those sessions. Once again, thank you to all the panelists for being here this afternoon. Hope you had a great time listening to Priya and watching the phenomenal work, fantastic work that she's been doing so far. Thank you once again to all the participants, and ciao. See you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Priya.
Thank you.